I came home from work on a Tuesday afternoon in late April to find construction equipment parked in front of my house in Scottsdale, Arizona, and the sound of heavy machinery rumbling through what should have been a quiet suburban neighborhood. My stomach dropped when I realized the noise was coming from my property. I parked my truck on the street because there was a backhoe blocking my driveway and sprinted around to my backyard, where I'd spent 3 years cultivating a vegetable garden that had become something of a neighborhood landmark. What I saw made my blood run cold. The garden was gone. Completely gone. Where rows of heirloom tomatoes, bell peppers, zucchini, and herbs had thrived just that morning, there was now freshly graded dirt and gravel. A paving crew was already laying down asphalt, spreading the black material across what had been my carefully tended soil. My raised beds, built from cedar planks I'd cut and assembled myself, were smashed to pieces and thrown in a pile near the back fence. The irrigation system I'd installed was ripped out, pipes jutting from the ground like broken bones. What the hell is going on here? I shouted over the noise of the machinery. A man in a hard hat and orange safety vest turned to look at me, clipboard in hand. "You the homeowner?" "Yes, I'm Isaac Garrett. This is my property." "Why are you destroying my garden?" He checked his clipboard. "We're contracted by the Sunset Ridge HOA to expand the overflow parking area. This section was approved at the last board meeting." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Nobody told me anything about this. That's my garden, my private property behind my house." The foreman shrugged. "I just follow the work orders, man. You'll have to take it up with the HOA. We're getting paid to pave this section today, and that's what we're doing." I pulled out my phone and called the HOA office immediately. A woman with a nasal voice answered. "Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association. This is Deborah speaking." "This is Isaac Garrett from 4287 Sagaro Lane. There's a construction crew destroying my garden right now, and I never authorized any of this. I need someone to explain what's happening immediately." "Oh, Mr. Garrett. Let me transfer you to Patricia, our board president." After a moment, another voice came on the line. This one was sharper, more authoritative. "Mr. Garrett, this is Patricia Hendricks. I understand you're concerned about the parking expansion." "Concerned? I'm watching people pave over 3 years of work without my permission. This is my property." "Actually, Mr. Garrett, if you check your property deed and the HOA covenant, you'll find that the area behind your rear fence line belongs to the common area maintained by the association. The board voted to convert that space into additional parking to address the overflow issues we've been experiencing during community events." I walked to the back fence, phone pressed to my ear. "Patricia, this garden is inside my fence line. It's on my property. I've been maintaining it since I moved in. The fence was placed incorrectly by a previous homeowner. Our survey clearly shows that approximately 15 feet beyond your current fence line is actually HOA common property. You've been utilizing association land without permission for 3 years." My hands were shaking. Then why wasn't I notified about this? Why didn't anyone come to me before sending in bulldozers? Notice was provided according to our bylaws. An announcement was posted in the monthly newsletter, on the community website, and on the bulletin board at the mailbox kiosk. The project was approved by a majority vote of the board 3 weeks ago. I never got any newsletter. I don't check the website regularly, and you're telling me that a notice on a bulletin board is sufficient before destroying someone's property, the common property, Mr. Garrett. And yes, according to our governing documents, those notification methods are legally sufficient. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to. The construction will be completed by end of business today, and we expect all residents to comply with the new parking regulations once the area is open for use." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there watching the workers spread asphalt over soil that I'd amended with compost, where I'd planted seedlings and watched them grow, where I'd harvested vegetables that I'd shared with neighbors and donated to the local food bank. The cherry tomato plants I'd been growing from seeds saved from my grandmother's garden in Ohio were gone. The herb spiral I'd built was crushed. 3 years of work, destroyed in an afternoon. I spent the rest of the day documenting everything. I took dozens of photos and videos from every angle, showing the construction in progress, the destroyed garden beds, the uprooted plants. I filmed the workers paving over my garden while the timestamp on my phone proved the date and time. I photographed the property markers at the corners of my lot, noting their positions relative to my fence and the new parking area. By 6 in the evening, the crew had finished. Where my garden had been, there was now a smooth expanse of black asphalt with crisp yellow lines marking out 6 parking spaces. The workers packed up their equipment and drove away, leaving me standing in my backyard, staring at the destruction. My neighbor, Tom Chen, came over as I was taking the last few photos. He was in his 60s, retired from a career in civil engineering, and had always admired my garden. "Isaac, I'm so sorry. I saw what they did. This is wrong. Did you know this was happening? I got a notice in the mail last week about the parking expansion, but it didn't specify whose property would be affected. I assumed they were talking about that empty lot near the community center, not your garden. A lot of us are upset about this. Patricia says the land belongs to the HOA. That my fence is in the wrong place." Tom frowned. "I helped you install that fence 2 years ago. We used the property markers from your survey. I know we placed it correctly because I checked the measurements myself. You still have that survey. It's in my filing cabinet. The one from when I bought the house. Get it out. I think we need to look at this more carefully, and you might want to talk to a lawyer." That evening, I spread the property survey across my kitchen table and studied it carefully. The document clearly showed the boundaries of my lot, marked with specific measurements and coordinates. According to this survey, my fence was positioned correctly, about 3 feet inside my property line to allow for maintenance access. The garden had been entirely on my land, well within the boundaries I owned. I scanned the survey and all the photos I'd taken, then spent 2 hours researching property law and HOA regulations in Arizona. What I found wasn't encouraging. HOAs in Arizona had broad powers to enforce their covenants and manage common areas, but they couldn't simply claim private property without due process. If there was a legitimate boundary dispute, it should have been resolved through proper legal channels, not by sending in construction crews without the owner's explicit consent. The next morning, I called in sick to my job at the aerospace manufacturing plant, where I worked as a quality control inspector, and drove straight to the offices of Brennan and Associates, an attorney's office I'd found through online reviews that specialized in HOA disputes and property law. The receptionist worked me in for a consultation that afternoon. James Brennan was in his late 40s, with graying hair and the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many HOA horror stories. He listened to my account while reviewing the photos on my phone and the documents I'd brought. "This is egregious," he said finally. "Even if there was a legitimate boundary dispute, which I doubt based on this survey, the HOA can't just destroy your property without notice and due process. You said they claimed to have provided notice." The board president said it was in a newsletter and on their website and a bulletin board. "Did you receive the newsletter?" "No. They claim to send one monthly, but I've never gotten it. I think they only send it to people who specifically request it or access it online. James made notes on a legal pad. Arizona law requires HOAs to provide reasonable notice for actions that affect individual homeowners, especially when it involves property rights. A general announcement about a parking expansion doesn't constitute specific notice that your garden would be destroyed. They should have contacted you directly in writing with details about the proposed action and an opportunity to contest it. So what can I do? We file a lawsuit immediately. We'll seek an injunction requiring them to restore your garden, compensatory damages for the value of the destroyed plants and improvements, and punitive damages for the willful destruction of your property. We'll also petition for attorney fees, which Arizona law allows in HOA disputes when the association acts improperly. How much is this going to cost me? My retainer for a case like this is $5,000. However, if we win, which I believe we will, the HOA will be ordered to pay your legal fees in addition to damages. You'd get your retainer back and potentially a significant settlement. I thought about my savings account. $5,000 was a lot of money, but the principle of what had happened made my decision easy. Let's do it. James nodded. I'll need you to sign a representation agreement and write a check for the retainer. Then I'll start drafting the complaint today. We'll file with the Maricopa County Superior Court by the end of the week. Over the next 3 days, I worked with James and his paralegal to compile a comprehensive case file. We documented every aspect of my garden, including receipts for the materials I'd purchased, photos from various stages of its development over 3 years, testimony from neighbors who'd seen me working on it, and even social media posts I'd made about harvesting vegetables. Tom Chen provided an affidavit about helping me install the fence according to the property survey. We obtained additional evidence showing that I'd paid property taxes on the land where the garden had been, which the county records confirmed was within my lot boundaries. James also discovered that the HOA's claim about the survey was suspicious. He hired a professional surveyor to remeasure my property, and the new survey confirmed what my original one had shown. The garden had been on my land, not on HOA common property. The fence was correctly positioned. The HOA's assertion that the previous homeowner had placed the fence incorrectly was false. On Friday afternoon, James filed the lawsuit. The complaint named the Sunset Ridge HOA, board president Patricia Hendricks, and the other 4 board members as defendants. It alleged trespass, destruction of property, negligence, and violation of Arizona's HOA statutes regarding proper notice and due process. We asked for $50,000 in compensatory damages, an additional $50,000 in punitive damages, restoration of the garden to its previous condition, and attorney fees. The HOA had 20 days to respond. During that time, I received a letter from Patricia Hendricks, written on HOA letterhead in a tone that dripped with condescension. It informed me that I was in violation of association rules by conducting unauthorized legal action against the association, and that my monthly dues would be increased by a special assessment to cover the HOA's legal defense costs. The letter also threatened additional fines if I didn't immediately cease my harassment of the board. I forwarded the letter to James, who actually laughed when he read it. They're trying to intimidate you, and they're making it worse for themselves. You can't be penalized for exercising your legal rights. This letter is evidence of retaliation, which we'll add to the complaint as an amendment. The HOA's response came exactly 20 days after we filed, delivered by a law firm from Phoenix that specialized in representing HOAs. Their answer denied all allegations and asserted that the parking expansion was a legitimate exercise of the association's authority over common property. They claimed that my survey was outdated and that a more recent survey, which they attached, showed the disputed area was indeed HOA land. James studied their survey with a critical eye. This is interesting. Their survey was commissioned 3 weeks before they started construction. Notice how conveniently it shows that exactly the area they wanted to pave is supposedly common property. I'm going to have our surveyor examine this. Our surveyor, a crusty professional named Bill Morrison who'd been working in Maricopa County for 30 years, reviewed the HOA's survey and found multiple problems. The most damning was that the reference points used didn't match the official property markers recorded with the county. Bill wrote a detailed report explaining that the HOA's survey appeared to have been manipulated to produce a desired result, rather than accurately measuring the boundaries. In my professional opinion, Bill wrote in his affidavit, the survey submitted by the defendants is inconsistent with established property records and appears to have been prepared to justify actions already taken rather than to accurately determine property boundaries. James filed the amended complaint, adding the retaliation claim and including Bill's affidavit. The case was assigned to Judge Margaret Winters, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for being tough on HOAs that overstep their authority. In June, we had our first hearing for the preliminary injunction. I took the day off work and sat in the courtroom while James presented our case to Judge Winters. The HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man named Robert Vance, argued that the case was premature, that the parking area was already completed, and that an injunction would serve no purpose. James countered, Your Honor, the defendants destroyed my client's property based on a fraudulent survey and without proper notice. The fact that they've already completed the destruction makes the injunction more necessary, not less. We're asking the court to order them to remove the parking area and restore the property to its previous condition while this case proceeds. Judge Winters studied the documents in front of her. Mr. Vance, I'm looking at 2 surveys here that tell completely different stories. Why should I believe your client's survey over the one that was filed with the county when Mr. Garrett purchased his property? Your Honor, surveys can be outdated. Property lines are sometimes disputed. The HOA had every right to commission a new survey to clarify the boundaries. After 3 years of Mr. Garrett maintaining a garden there without any complaint from the HOA, that seems convenient, and I'm troubled by this affidavit from Mr. Morrison questioning the validity of your survey. She flipped through more pages. I'm also concerned about this letter from Miss Hendricks threatening Mr. Garrett with fines and special assessments for filing this lawsuit. That looks like retaliation. The HOA has a right to defend itself and to assess members for legal costs according to the governing documents. Not when those assessments are targeted at a specific member for exercising his legal rights, Mr. Vance. That's retaliatory and potentially unlawful. Judge Winters closed the folder. I'm granting a preliminary injunction. The Sunset Ridge HOA is ordered to cease using the parking area constructed on the disputed property and to barricade it pending resolution of this case. Furthermore, the HOA is enjoined from imposing any special assessments, fines, or other penalties against Mr. Garrett related to this litigation. We'll schedule a trial date for September. In the meantime, I'm ordering both parties to participate in mediation. Perhaps this can be resolved without a full trial. I felt a surge of relief as we left the courthouse. That went well, right? James nodded. Judge Winters is fair, and she clearly sees problems with the HOA's position, but don't celebrate yet. They can still fight this, and mediation might not produce a settlement. We need to keep building our case. The HOA barricaded the parking area with orange construction barriers and posted signs saying it was closed. Patricia Hendricks sent an email to all residents blaming me for the loss of parking spaces and claiming I was costing the association thousands of dollars in legal fees. Several neighbors reached out to express their support for me, but I also started getting hostile looks from others who believed Patricia's version of events. Mediation was scheduled for July. It took place in a conference room at the courthouse with a retired judge serving as mediator. I sat on one side of the table with James. Across from us were Patricia Hendricks, two other board members, and their attorney. Patricia looked exactly as I'd imagined from her voice on the phone. A woman in her early 50s with bleached blonde hair styled in a stiff helmet, too much makeup, and an expression of perpetual disapproval. She wore a blazer with shoulder pads that would have been fashionable in the 1980s, and carried a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The mediator, Judge Frank Reynolds, explained the process. We're here to see if we can reach a settlement without going to trial. This is non-binding, and anything said here can't be used in court. I encourage both parties to be open and honest about what they want and what they're willing to accept. James started. My client wants his garden restored to its previous condition, compensation for 3 years of work and the value of the destroyed plants and improvements, and an acknowledgement from the HOA that they acted improperly. Patricia interrupted before her attorney could speak. That's absurd. We did nothing wrong. The parking area is on HOA property, and we followed all proper procedures. Mr. Garrett is the one who's been trespassing on association land for 3 years. Miss Hendricks, the mediator said mildly, please let your attorney speak for you. Robert Vance cleared his throat. The HOA's position is that the parking expansion was legitimate and necessary. We're willing to offer Mr. Garrett a settlement of $5,000 to compensate him for any inconvenience, with no admission of wrongdoing. In exchange, he would withdraw his lawsuit and the parking area would remain. I started to object, but James put a hand on my arm. That's insulting, and you know it. We have documentation showing the garden was worth at least $30,000 in improvements alone, not counting the destruction of property and the retaliatory actions against my client. We also have expert testimony that your survey is fraudulent. Fraudulent? Patricia's face reddened. How dare you? We paid a licensed surveyor good money for that survey. A surveyor who produced a result that conveniently justified what you'd already decided to do, James said calmly. Our expert has identified multiple problems with that survey that suggest it was manipulated. The mediation continued for 3 hours. The HOA gradually increased their offer, but never beyond $15,000 and never with any agreement to restore the garden. James and I discussed their offers during breaks, but I wasn't interested in settling. It's not about the money, I told him during one break. I want my garden back. That was 3 years of my life. I had plants from my grandmother's garden. This was personal to me, and they destroyed it without even talking to me first. I understand, and I think we can win more at trial. But I have to present their offers to you and make sure you understand the risks. Trials are unpredictable. I want to go to trial. In the end, mediation failed. We couldn't reach an agreement, and the case was set for trial in September. Over the next 2 months, both sides engaged in discovery. We requested documents from the HOA, including meeting minutes, financial records, the contract with the surveyor, and all communications about the parking expansion. They requested documentation from me about the garden, What we found in their documents was damaging to their case. The meeting minutes showed that the board had discussed the parking expansion for months, and in several meetings, members explicitly acknowledged that part of the proposed area was on my property. One exchange was particularly revealing. Patricia Hendricks had said, "We'll deal with Garrett if he complains. Most homeowners don't know their property boundaries, and by the time he figures it out, the parking will be done." Another board member, Linda Chambers, had expressed concern. "Shouldn't we get his permission first?" Patricia's response, "That would just give him a chance to say no. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission, and frankly, the association needs this parking. One resident's hobby garden doesn't outweigh the needs of the community." James was delighted when he saw these minutes. "They knew they were destroying your property, and they did it anyway. This is going to be very bad for them at trial." We also found that Patricia had a history of aggressive tactics against homeowners who disagreed with her. 3 other residents had filed complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate, which oversees HOAs, about her behavior. None of the complaints had resulted in action, but they established a pattern of Patricia abusing her authority as board president. The trial began on September 15th, a warm Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix. The courthouse was busy with various cases, but we were assigned to Judge Winter's courtroom, which I took as a good sign given her previous ruling. Jury selection took most of the first day. James wanted jurors who were homeowners themselves and might sympathize with someone having their property destroyed, while the HOA's attorney seemed to prefer jurors who might value community rules and authority. We ended up with a jury of 8, 5 women and 3 men, ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s. The trial itself began on Wednesday. James gave our opening statement, walking the jury through what had happened and showing them photos of my garden before and after. He explained how I'd spent 3 years building something meaningful, only to have it destroyed in an afternoon without notice. "This isn't a story about a property line dispute," he told the jury. "This is a story about an HOA board that knew it was destroying a homeowner's property and did it anyway, because it was more convenient than following the law." You'll see meeting minutes where the board president explicitly said they would deal with Mr. Garrett if he complained. You'll hear from expert witnesses who will tell you that the garden was on Mr. Garrett's property, not on HOA land. And you'll see evidence of retaliation against Mr. Garrett for having the audacity to stand up for his rights. Robert Vance's opening statement portrayed me as an unreasonable homeowner who'd been misusing association property and now refused to accept the legitimate authority of the HOA. He claimed the board had acted in the best interests of the community and followed all proper procedures. The first witness was me. James walked me through my background, how I'd bought the house, why I'd started the garden, and what it meant to me. I explained about my grandmother's tomato plants, about donating vegetables to the food bank, about the satisfaction of growing my own food. I described coming home to find the garden being destroyed and my attempts to get answers from the HOA. Robert Vance's cross-examination was aggressive. "Mr. Garrett, did you ever obtain permission from the HOA to plant a garden in the common area?" "It wasn't in the common area." "It was on my property." "But you didn't seek approval from the Architectural Review Committee before installing the garden, did you?" "I didn't think I needed approval to plant vegetables on my own land." "You received the monthly newsletters, didn't you?" "No, I never received any newsletters." "But you were responsible for checking the community website and bulletin boards for official notices, weren't you?" "I didn't know that. Nobody told me when I moved in that I was required to check a website." The cross-examination continued, with Vance trying to paint me as someone who'd ignored association rules and was now claiming ignorance. But James had prepared me well, and I stayed calm and consistent. Our next witness was Tom Chen, who testified about helping me install the fence using the property survey and his professional assessment that we'd done it correctly. He also testified about the garden itself, describing how well maintained it was and how I'd shared vegetables with neighbors. Bill Morrison, our surveyor, testified next. He explained the technical details of property surveys and walked the jury through the problems with the HOA's survey. Using enlarged diagrams and photos, he showed how their survey used reference points that didn't match the official county records, and how the measurements were inconsistent with established boundaries. In your professional opinion, James asked, was the garden on Mr. Garrett's property or on HOA common property? Absolutely on Mr. Garrett's property. There's no question about it based on the official survey and county records. What about the survey commissioned by the HOA? That survey is not consistent with established property boundaries. I believe it was prepared to justify a predetermined conclusion rather than to accurately measure the property. Robert Vance tried to challenge Bill's credentials and methodology during cross-examination. But Bill had been doing this for 30 years and had testified in dozens of cases. He calmly defended his analysis and pointed out specific technical errors in the HOA's survey that Vance couldn't explain away. We also called several neighbors who testified about the garden and about Patricia's tendency to bully homeowners who disagreed with her. One woman, Margaret Foster, described how Patricia had threatened her with fines when she'd questioned a different board decision. She told me that if I didn't like how the board ran things, I could sell my house and move somewhere else, Margaret testified. She said the board didn't answer to residents. On the third day of trial, the defense presented their case. Their surveyor, a younger man named Derek Phillips, defended his survey and insisted it was accurate. But under James's cross-examination, he admitted that he'd been given specific instructions by Patricia about what area needed to be surveyed, and that she'd told him they needed documentation showing the area was HOA property. Did that strike you as unusual? James asked. Somewhat, but clients sometimes have expectations about survey results. Did you feel pressure to produce a survey that showed what the HOA wanted it to show? I conducted a professional survey according to standard practices. That's not what I asked. Did you feel pressure to produce a specific result? Derek hesitated. Miss Hendricks made it clear that the parking area was important to the association and that they needed the survey to support their project. Several board members testified, all claiming they'd believed the parking area was on HOA property and that they'd followed proper procedures. But under cross-examination, they struggled to explain the meeting minutes where they discussed knowing the area was on my property. Patricia Hendricks was the defense's final witness. She took the stand wearing another outdated power suit and an expression of righteous indignation. Robert Vance led her through testimony about her service on the board, the parking shortage in the community, and the decision to expand parking. Did you believe the parking expansion was on HOA property? He asked. Absolutely. We commissioned a professional survey that confirmed it. Did you intend to harm Mr. Garrett? Of course not. We were addressing a community need. If anything, Mr. Garrett should have been grateful that we were improving the neighborhood. James's cross-examination was devastating. He started by asking Patricia about the meeting minutes. Miss Hendricks, you're quoted in the minutes from the March board meeting as saying, "We'll deal with Garrett if he complains." You recall saying that? I may have said something like that, but it was taken out of context. What was the context? We knew the parking area might be close to his property line, and we were prepared to discuss it with him if necessary. But you never did discuss it with him before destroying his garden, did you? We provided notice according to our procedures. James displayed a blown-up copy of the meeting minutes on a screen visible to the jury. In this same meeting, board member Linda Chambers said, "Shouldn't we get his permission first?" And you responded, "That would just give him a chance to say no. It's easier to ask forgiveness than permission." Did you say that? Patricia's face flushed. I don't recall the exact wording, but you don't deny that you decided not to seek Mr. Garrett's permission because you knew he might refuse. We didn't need his permission to use association property. But you knew it wasn't association property, didn't you? You knew the garden was on his land, and you decided to destroy it anyway because the parking was more important to you than his property rights. That's not true. We relied on the survey. The survey you commissioned after you'd already decided to pave over his garden. The survey that conveniently showed exactly what you needed it to show. James pulled out more documents. In fact, Miss Hendricks, the construction contract was signed 2 weeks before you even commissioned the survey, wasn't it? Patricia glanced at her attorney. I'd have to check the dates. Let me help you. The construction contract is dated March 10th. The survey is dated March 24th. You hired the construction company before you even had a survey claiming the property was yours. That's because you knew the garden was on Mr. Garrett's property, and you didn't care. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Patricia's labored breathing. She'd been caught in a lie, and everyone knew it. James continued. After Mr. Garrett filed this lawsuit, you sent him a letter threatening him with fines and special assessments for taking legal action. Why did you do that? The HOA has a right to assess members for legal costs. But you didn't assess all members equally, did you? You specifically targeted Mr. Garrett with threats because he dared to challenge your authority. He was causing problems for the entire community by standing up for his property rights, by refusing to let you get away with destroying 3 years of his work without consequence. Patricia's composure cracked. Mr. Garrett is selfish and unreasonable. He cares more about his little garden than about what's good for the community. The board made a decision that was in everyone's best interest, and he can't accept that. So it's acceptable to destroy someone's property if you've decided it's for the greater good. That's not what I said. But it's what you did, isn't it, Miss Hendricks? Robert Vance objected, and Judge Winters sustained it, but the damage was done. Patricia had revealed herself to the jury as exactly what we'd claimed. Someone who believed her authority as board president placed her above the law. Closing arguments took place on Thursday afternoon. Robert Vance did his best to argue that the HOA had acted reasonably based on the information it had, and that any errors were honest mistakes, not willful destruction of property. He suggested that I was seeking an unreasonable windfall, and that the jury should award minimal damages if they found for me at all. James's closing argument was passionate and thorough. He walked the jury through the evidence piece by piece, showing how the HOA had known the garden was on my property, had destroyed it anyway without proper notice, and had then tried to cover up their actions with a questionable survey and false testimony. He displayed photos of the garden before and after, reminding the jury of what had been lost. This case is about respect, he told them. Respect for property rights. Respect for the work and care that Isaac Garrett put into his garden. Respect for the law. The defendants had none of that respect. They saw something they wanted, and they took it, believing they were above the rules that apply to everyone else. Patricia Hendricks sat right there and told you that Isaac Garrett is selfish for wanting to keep what was his. But who's really selfish? The man who spent 3 years growing vegetables and sharing them with his neighbors, or the HOA board that destroyed his work, because asking his permission would have been inconvenient. You have the power to tell the defendants that this behavior is unacceptable, that homeowners have rights that HOAs must respect. That might doesn't make right. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before reaching a verdict. Judge Winters called us back into the courtroom at 4 in the afternoon. I sat next to James, my heart pounding as the jury filed in. None of them looked at the defense table, which James whispered was a good sign. Judge Winters addressed the jury foreman, a middle-aged man who'd been taking extensive notes throughout the trial. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff." The bailiff carried a sheet of paper to Judge Winters, who reviewed it silently before handing it back. "The defendant will please rise." Patricia Hendricks and her fellow board members stood, along with their attorney. I stood as well, my legs shaky. The bailiff will now read the verdict. In the case of Garrett versus Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Isaac Garrett, on all counts. We find that the defendants did trespass on the plaintiff's property, did willfully destroy his garden without proper notice or permission, did violate Arizona HOA statutes, and did engage in retaliatory conduct against the plaintiff. I felt James grip my shoulder as relief flooded through me. The bailiff continued. "We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $45,000. We award punitive damages in the amount of $75,000. We order the defendants to remove the parking area and restore the plaintiff's property to its previous condition at their expense." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The jury had awarded me more than we'd asked for. Judge Winters addressed the courtroom. "The jury has spoken. In addition to the jury's award, I'm granting the plaintiff's motion for attorney fees. The defendants will be responsible for all of Mr. Garrett's legal costs in this matter. I'm also issuing an order requiring the defendants to remove the parking area within 30 days and to work with the plaintiff and a professional landscaper to restore the garden. A neutral expert will be appointed to oversee the restoration to ensure it's done properly." She looked at Patricia Hendricks, who stood pale and trembling. "Miss Hendricks, the evidence presented in this trial showed a pattern of abuse of authority and disregard for homeowners' rights. I'm recommending that the Arizona Department of Real Estate conduct an investigation into your conduct as board president. This court will not tolerate HOA board members who believe they are above the law." As we left the courthouse, I felt like I could finally breathe. James was grinning. "That was a complete victory. Congratulations. Thank you for believing in me and taking this case. Thank you for having the courage to stand up to them. A lot of homeowners would have just accepted it." Over the next month, the HOA was forced to comply with the judgment. They hired a crew to remove the asphalt and dispose of it properly. The property was regraded, and new soil was brought in to replace what had been destroyed. Judge Winters appointed a landscape architect named Dr. Elena Martinez to oversee the restoration. Dr. Martinez met with me several times to discuss what the garden had been and what I wanted it to become. She reviewed all my photos and documentation, consulted with specialists about the specific plants I'd been growing, and developed a comprehensive restoration plan. "We're going to make this better than before," she told me. "The HOA is paying for everything, so we can use the highest quality materials and plants. Think of this as an opportunity." The restoration took 6 weeks. Workers rebuilt the raised beds using premium cedar, installed a new irrigation system even better than the one I'd had, and brought in enriched soil. Dr. Martinez sourced heirloom tomato plants as close as possible to the varieties I'd been growing, including some that she tracked down from specialty nurseries. She couldn't replace my grandmother's plants exactly, but she found the same variety and assured me that with care, they'd produce the same kind of tomatoes. The herb spiral was rebuilt with carefully selected stones, and the new herbs were already establishing themselves. Bell peppers, zucchini, cucumbers, and other vegetables were planted according to the photos I'd provided. Dr. Martinez even added some improvements: a small greenhouse, better trellises for the tomatoes, and a composting system that was more efficient than what I'd had before. In late November, Dr. Martinez conducted a final inspection and declared the restoration complete. I walked through the garden, which looked better than I could have imagined. The plants were thriving, and the new infrastructure would make maintenance easier. It wasn't exactly the same as what I'd built myself over 3 years, but it was beautiful and functional. The HOA paid the full judgment amount, $120,000 in damages, plus $68,000 in attorney fees and costs. James took care of the legal fees and returned my $5,000 retainer, and I was left with $120,000. But the financial victory wasn't the most satisfying part. 2 weeks after the trial ended, the Arizona Department of Real Estate launched an investigation into Patricia Hendricks and the HOA board based on Judge Winter's recommendation. They interviewed dozens of homeowners and reviewed years of board records. What they found was extensive: a pattern of financial mismanagement, abuse of authority, and violations of state HOA regulations. Patricia was removed from the board and barred from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. 2 other board members resigned. The state imposed fines on the association and required them to implement new governance procedures, including mandatory training for board members and greater financial transparency. A special election was held to replace the removed and resigned board members. Several neighbors who'd supported me during the lawsuit ran for positions, including Tom Chen and Margaret Foster. They both won, along with a third candidate who'd been vocal about the need for reform. The new board's first action was to revise the HOA's notification procedures to require direct written notice to any homeowner whose property would be affected by association actions. They also implemented a formal dispute resolution process and established clearer guidelines about property boundaries and common areas. Patricia tried to stay in the neighborhood for a few months after her removal from the board, but the social pressure became too intense. She'd built her identity around being the powerful HOA president, and without that authority, she was just another homeowner. By January, she'd put her house on the market. She moved out in March, and I never saw her again. The restored garden became something of a neighborhood gathering place. I started hosting weekend work parties where neighbors could come help with maintenance and take home vegetables. I taught several families how to start their own gardens, sharing seedlings and advice. The food bank donations resumed, larger than before thanks to the expanded and improved growing capacity. One Saturday in April, almost exactly a year after the garden had been destroyed, I hosted a celebration. Dozens of neighbors came to see the garden in full spring bloom. We had a potluck with dishes made from vegetables I'd grown, and people kept thanking me for fighting the HOA. Tom Chen raised a glass of lemonade and a toast to Isaac for having the courage to stand up for what was right, and to gardens, which bring communities together. Everyone cheered, and I looked around at the thriving plants, the smiling faces, and the neighborhood that had become more united through this struggle. The garden was more than just vegetables. It was proof that individuals could stand up to institutional power and win, that property rights mattered, and that communities were strongest when they respected every member. The tomatoes from my grandmother's variety produced their first ripe fruit in June. I picked one, still warm from the sun, and bit into it. The taste was exactly as I remembered from childhood, sweet, tangy, and perfect. I saved seeds from that tomato and from the others that followed, ensuring that my grandmother's legacy would continue. The parking spaces that had been paved over my garden were never replaced. The HOA eventually converted the empty lot near the community center into a parking area, which provided more spaces than the area they'd destroyed would have. It turned out Patricia had been wrong. The association didn't need to destroy my garden after all. They just wanted to, because it was easier than finding a better solution. Life settled into a new normal over the following months. I continued working at the aerospace plant, tending my garden in the evenings and on weekends. The lawsuit had cost me time, money, and stress, but it had been worth it. I'd learned that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, even when the opponent seems more powerful. The garden thrived through summer and into fall. I harvested bushels of tomatoes, peppers, squash, and herbs. The food bank was grateful for the donations, which helped feed families struggling with food insecurity. Neighbors continued to visit, and several started their own gardens inspired by mine. One evening in October, I was watering the plants when a young couple walked up. They'd recently moved into the neighborhood and heard the story of the lawsuit. "We wanted to meet you and see the famous garden," the woman said. "I'm Wendy Walker, and this is my husband, Marcus." I showed them around, explaining what I'd planted and answering their questions about gardening. Wendy mentioned that she'd grown up helping her mother garden and wanted to start again now that they had a house. "The HOA won't give you any trouble about it," I assured her. "Not after what happened with me. The new board actually encourages gardens. They've added a section to the website about sustainable landscaping and composting." We talked for an hour, and by the end, I'd sent them home with a basket of vegetables and a promise to help them plan their own garden. It felt good to share what I'd learned and to see the positive changes spreading through the community. The lawsuit had changed more than just my own situation. It had exposed problems with how the HOA operated and forced meaningful reforms. Other homeowners felt empowered to speak up about issues instead of accepting whatever the board decided. Meeting attendance increased dramatically as residents took more interest in how their association was run. The new board was transparent and responsive. They posted detailed financial reports online, held open forums to discuss major decisions, and actually listened to homeowners' concerns. The association's culture shifted from top-down control to collaborative governance. It wasn't perfect, but it was dramatically better than the Patricia Hendricks era. In December, I received a letter from the Arizona Department of Real Estate informing me that their investigation had concluded. Patricia Hendricks had been fined $15,000 personally for violations of her fiduciary duties as board president. The association itself was fined $25,000 and placed on probationary status for 2 years. The letter thanked me for bringing the issues to light and noted that my lawsuit had helped protect other homeowners from similar abuses. As the year drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. The garden was flourishing, more beautiful and productive than ever. The lawsuit had been stressful and time-consuming, but it had vindicated my rights and created lasting positive change. The money from the judgment had allowed me to pay off my mortgage and start a college fund for my nephew. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself and my community that standing up to abuse of power was possible and worthwhile. The narrative that HOAs were all-powerful and couldn't be challenged had been shattered. Homeowners had rights, and those rights could be enforced through the legal system when necessary. I spent New Year's Eve at home, sitting in my restored garden even though it was chilly. The winter vegetables were growing well: kale, carrots, and lettuce that would be ready to harvest in a few weeks. I thought about my grandmother and how proud she would have been to see her tomato plants thriving in my Arizona garden, carried across the country through seeds and love and determination. The garden was more than plants and soil. It was a symbol of resistance against arbitrary authority, of community building, and of the importance of fighting for what matters. Every tomato I harvested, every vegetable I donated, every neighbor I taught to garden was a small victory over the mindset that had tried to destroy it. As the new year began, I made plans for the spring planting. I'd try some new heirloom varieties, expand the herb spiral, and maybe add a section for flowers that would attract pollinators. The garden would continue to grow and evolve, just as the community had grown and evolved through our shared experience. Tom Chen came by on New Year's Day, and we stood looking at the garden together. "You know," he said, "when they first paved over this place, I wasn't sure you'd be able to fix it. I'm glad I was wrong." "I couldn't have done it without support from you and the other neighbors," I replied, "and without a good lawyer who believed in the case. You did the hard part. You had the guts to stand up to Patricia when most people would have just accepted the loss and moved on." "It was never really about just the garden," I said. "It was about principle, about not letting bullies get away with abusing their power." Tom nodded. "Well, you definitely accomplished that. Patricia's gone, the HOA is actually functional now, and your garden is better than ever. I'd say that's a win." We stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the winter sun illuminate the plants. The garden was at peace, and so was I. The fight had been worth it, every stressful moment and every dollar spent. I'd protected my property, held wrongdoers accountable, and helped create a better community for everyone. The story could have ended differently. I could have given up when faced with the HOA's superior resources and aggressive tactics. I could have accepted a lowball settlement just to make the stress go away. I could have believed Patricia when she said I was being selfish and unreasonable. But I hadn't, and that made all the difference. As spring approached, the garden burst into new growth. The tomatoes I'd planted in late winter started setting fruit. The herbs grew lush and fragrant. Neighbors stopped by regularly, and the weekend work parties became a neighborhood tradition. Children came to learn about where food came from, and elderly residents found a peaceful place to sit and enjoy nature. The garden had become something bigger than I'd originally intended. It was a community resource, an educational tool, and a living reminder that individuals had power when they stood up for their rights. The lawsuit's impact rippled outward in ways I hadn't anticipated, inspiring other homeowners in other neighborhoods to challenge HOA overreach. I received several emails from people around Arizona who'd read about the case in news articles. They told their own stories of HOA abuse and asked for advice. I shared what I'd learned. Document everything, know your rights, find a good attorney, and don't back down when you're in the right. Several of them filed their own lawsuits, and some won significant victories. The garden continued to thrive as the seasons passed. I expanded it slightly, adding a berry patch in a corner that got good sun. The strawberries and blueberries would take a couple of years to reach full production, but I was patient. Gardening had taught me the value of playing the long game, of investing effort now for rewards in the future. That same principle had applied to the lawsuit. Fighting the HOA had required time, money, and emotional energy, but the long-term benefits far exceeded the short-term costs. My property was restored, my rights were vindicated, the community was improved, and I'd recovered more in damages than I'd spent on legal fees. By the second anniversary of the original destruction, the garden looked like it had always been there. The plants were mature and productive, the infrastructure was solid, and the soil had developed the rich, living quality that came from years of good cultivation. You'd never know that 2 years earlier, this had been asphalt. I hosted another celebration, bigger than the first. We had live music, dozens of dishes made from garden produce, and neighbors sharing stories about their own gardens that they'd started after mine was restored. The new HOA board members attended and praised the garden as an example of what made Sunset Ridge a special community. Tom Chen gave another toast, this one about how adversity could sometimes lead to positive change if people had the courage to stand up and fight. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction and belonging. This was home, and this garden was my contribution to making it better. As the party wound down and the sun set over the Sonnet Mountains, I walked through the garden rows one more time. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, the peppers were bright and glossy, and the herbs filled the air with their fragrance. This was what Patricia Hendricks had tried to destroy, and this was what I'd fought to restore. The garden would continue long after I was gone. The seeds I saved would be planted by others. The neighbors I taught would teach their own children and grandchildren. The precedent set by the lawsuit would protect future homeowners from similar abuses. What had started as a personal project had become a legacy, and that was worth more than any monetary judgment. I picked a ripe tomato, one of the descendants of my grandmother's plants, and bit into it as the last light faded from the sky. The taste was perfect, exactly right, a connection across generations and across the miles from Ohio to Arizona. This was why I'd fought. This was what victory tasted like. The garden grew on,